Okay, so today we will see how you can use the power of graph databases to visualize and create Salesforce unlocked packages from Happy Soup. Have you just started a new job and got thrown into the deep end of the pool and are now trying to wrap your head around a highly complex Salesforce org? Or have you just been asked to look at all of the Happy Soup metadata in your org and see how that can be migrated to unlocked packages? Or perhaps you're just trying to determine the impact of making a change to an existing component. Well, if you answer yes to any of those questions, then you're in the right place. So, in any complex system, there are always some natural or organic clusters of components. Just like in a solar system, we have clusters of planets and stars that can be grouped together. If there was a way to isolate those clusters, and more importantly, be able to visualize them, it would become a lot easier to try and understand the system as a whole, and more importantly, creating groups of those clusters. Trying to declutter a Salesforce org that has been highly customized with unpackaged metadata can be a very daunting task. However, there's always a method to the madness. Today, we're going to explore a new technique of looking at highly complex Salesforce orgs and how we can go about 1. Visualizing the unpackaged metadata, 2. Determine metadata clusters, 3. Use a bottoms-up approach to identify metadata that is the common denominator, and 4. Identify and create packages using an iterative approach. And the best part about this approach is you can visualize your package boundaries before you actually make any changes to your org. Now, let's first talk about graph databases. Why use a graph database? So graph databases are ideal for mapping out highly interconnected entities, and our Happy Soup metadata is no different. The capability of a graph database to visualize relationships between nodes and filtering for nodes for a given criteria are unparalleled to what a relational database can offer. Today, we're going to use Neo4j as our graph database. But once you understand the approach we'll take, really, you can use any graph database. Now let's look at a sample application that we found on GitHub. It is a library management system for checking out books, etc. The actual functionality doesn't really matter to us, as our focus will be to restructure the code base into multiple packages. Now before we scan our sample project, let's look at the secret sauce. Well, it's not quite secret, as it's available as an open source NPM package. It is called the sfdep-graph, or really the SF dependency graph. You'll find the link for it in the description below. This library can scan multiple metadata items and extract the relationships between those metadata. These relationships can then be imported into a Neo4j database. Okay, let's get started. We've checked out the repository locally, and after looking at the different types of metadata, we're going to focus on the following metadata, which is Apex classes, the Apex triggers, the Apex pages, and lastly, the custom objects. This step is very important. You don't want to scan all your metadata, as that will make the graph too complex. The above metadata types that we just selected can be a great starting point for really any project. Obviously, once an initial version of the package is determined, you can always throw in additional metadata in it. But starting with these types first will make it much easier to visualize the package boundaries. So let's use the library to scan all of the above metadata. And now Okay, so as you can see, the library has extracted the relationship in two different formats. The cipher statements can be directly imported into the Neo4j database, and the JSON files are just there to make it easier for you to see how the relationships look like in a raw format. So what we're going to do is import these cipher statements into a Neo4j database and then see how the graph turns out. Okay, so this is the initial snapshot of relationships. The nice thing about using Neo4j is that it automatically places objects with the most relationships right in the center of what I call the universe of happy soup relationships. Now, initially, when you look at the graph, it looks pretty daunting. However, as you get closer, you will see that all the nodes have relationships to 5 or 6 common objects. So let's start by packaging these 5 or 6 common objects. We're going to create a new DX package by pulling down these common objects from the org, then install the DX package in the same org. And now when we run the secret sauce library, the relationships will instead point to a package instead of these individual components. Okay, so we've installed the first version of our first package onto the same org that we just ran the dependency analysis from. So let's look at the components on this package. If we look at the components, it is all the custom objects, the 5 or 6 custom objects that we saw that were like right dead in the center of that graph, along with the fields and any validation rules that might exist. And that's our first version of the package. So what we're going to do now is run the dependency analysis tool again and then see how the graph looks like. Okay, so let's look at how the references look like for a given class. So earlier, you can see that the Apex Test Util class had references to all these different fields, and the list goes on. And each one of those references would show up as a line in the graph. Now, when we've packaged up all these fields into one package, look at how nice and clean the references look like. We just have Apex Test Util references Helios Common, which is that one package that we now have. Okay, so now let's import these new set of cipher statements in a separate Neo4j database. Generally, I like to use a separate instance of Neo4j for each iteration so that we can see how we're simplifying the dependency graph and we can compare with previous versions. Okay, check this out. As we expected, our newly minted package is now at the center of the universe, as I call it. And all of these other unpackaged metadata has a ton of references back into this package that we just created. There's probably several other iterations that we could do, and here's really where the power of Neo4j comes into play. What we're going to do is now hide this particular node in the graph, and just to see, all right, what else is there that can further be packaged. So we're going to hide this node and then look at how Neo4j automatically draws the graph of relationships and really brings other objects into the center of the universe. Now, as you look closely into this graph, you'll see that there are still other nodes that we can further package, like this Apex test util class is a great candidate. There's probably another Apex class that we see here that is just kind of out on its own. Maybe a good idea to package that as well. And check out this node. That's a static resource. That's a Helios logo. That's a great candidate to be further packaged into this one package that we have. And remember, this is just an exercise. You can feel free to create maybe a different package if you wanted to for these metadata that we're just looking at. So there's probably a few other metadata that we're going to package these util classes. There's some triggers there out there, and of course that one static resource. So what we're going to do is add these particular metadata back into this package that we created, and install that package into the org, rerun the dependency analysis, and then we'll come right back to see how it looks like. Okay, so what we've done is added a couple of additional util classes, a couple of test classes, a couple of triggers that were just kind of out there on the outskirts of this galaxy, and also a static resource that seemed to have a lot of dependencies on it. And we've added all of that metadata into this one package that we created. And as you can see, this package is almost like a black hole that has sucked in all the nearby galaxies. But for the moment, we're going to use the trick of Neo4j to hide nodes and redraw the graphs. And wow, look at now how the graph looks like. You can actually now clearly see the different clusters of metadata, and you can probably start guessing and going about how you want to package the remaining metadata. So let's kind of like do a little deep dive into some of these objects. And remember, this is really the first time we're looking at this particular application. We didn't even need to understand the functionality, because all we're really doing here is just by inferencing the relationship and a little bit about the component types that we know, just by working within Salesforce, we're able to go from a very complex happy soup relationship over into a place where we can clearly see these clusters, and you can keep iterating over and over again. So let's look at the different groups of clusters we have. It looks like these set of Apex pages and classes are used for managing the books and books lists. And if we scroll over here, there's something related to checkout. And oh, look at that, there's an Apex batch class here and a batch class test. So perhaps what we can do is combine all the batch classes into one. Like here's another batch class, so if we wanted to, maybe we drag these over here, and maybe we'll create a package for batch classes. I'm not sure. There's clearly a cluster of locations, so maybe that's another set of package that we might have. We can probably drag this Apex page of checkout over into the checkout related pages. That probably belongs there. Remember, this is our batch class cluster. And let's see, there's the wait list, so probably something to do with wait list. That's a page here, maybe that belongs here, so we got that one cluster here. I'm not quite sure where these belong yet, but let's look at well, we've got a Apex class that's kind of sitting here on its own, so maybe these three can be combined into one. And let's see, this is another batch class. Okay, so all these four nodes are really batch class related, so what we're going to do is drag all these over here, and that becomes our another possibly package. Maybe we can have a package of just batch classes, so we know where we need to go for anything related to batch classes. So if we now zoom out, I think this wait list belongs here. You've just now created additional or organized the remaining metadata, so you can create maybe 5 additional packages, or maybe this is probably the area where you need additional information about what the application does, and how you want to further package the remaining metadata. But this would not have been possible without being able to visually look at the metadata. So let's do a little recap here. We started out with a completely unpackaged set of metadata for an application that we had never worked with. And we ran a dependency analysis tool and came up with this Neo4j graph database. After looking at some of the objects that were deeply embedded in the middle of that graph, we created our first version of our package. And after rerunning the dependency analysis tool, we came back with a much simplified version of the dependency graph. We ran another iteration by looking at, again, nodes that are deeply embedded right in the center of this universe. And the second iteration, we were really able to simplify and look at the different nodes of the clusters that are out there. And as you can see, we can probably see at least 5 different clusters that either can be combined into 2 or 3 packages depending on how you want to package them, or maybe just create separate individual 5 packages. So hopefully you found this session useful. If you did, hit the like button and share this with all your Salesforce friends.